The hum of the city bridge at dusk was a kind of music. Engines purring below, wind curling through steel beams, flags snapping against their poles. Captain Elijah Brooks stood on the pedestrian walkway, watching the river below cut a dark line through Nashville. He wasn't on duty that night. Tomb guards never really were. His uniform wasn't dress blue this time, just black slacks, a windbreaker, and the same posture that had been drilled into him at Arlington. Back straight, head level. Eyes that noticed everything without ever having to say they did. He'd just left a small memorial service at a nearby VFW hall. A buddy from his unit, a Vietnam vet, had passed away quietly 2 weeks before. Elijah liked to walk the bridge after events like that. He didn't talk much at these things, he just remembered. That's when he saw him. An old man in a loose jacket was leaning against the railing 20 yards ahead. His hat said K-San 1968 in faded yellow stitching. At first, Elijah thought he was just resting, but then the man's body sagged like something inside him had given way. A cane clattered to the pavement. Elijah's instincts fired. He moved forward quickly, not running, but fast enough that his shoes struck the concrete with quiet purpose. "Sir," he said gently, reaching out to steady the man by the elbow. "You all right?" The old man blinked slowly, like his eyes were trying to find the present, but kept getting stuck in the past. "Captain," he rasped, "you came back for us?" Elijah's chest tightened. He'd heard those words too many times. "At ease, soldier," he said quietly. "I'm here." He lowered the man, later he'd learn his name was Raymond Ray Turner, onto the bench near the railing. Ray was breathing hard, short and shallow, one hand gripping Elijah's wrist as if it was the only thing tethering him to solid ground. "Easy," Elijah murmured, fishing a small water bottle from his bag. "Sip this." Ray obeyed weakly. His hands trembled. And then the shaking got worse. Elijah recognized the signs instantly. PTSD flashback. He'd seen it before, guarding the tomb, when older veterans would come at night and stand in silence, tears streaking their faces. "Mortars!" Ray shouted suddenly, jerking. His fingers clawed at air. "Ray!" Elijah said, gripping his shoulder, not hard but firm enough to ground him. "It's 2025. Nashville. You're safe." But from a distance, through the lens of a stranger's phone, that kind of touch doesn't look like grounding. It looks like restraint. A couple walking a dog froze mid-step. The woman gasped. "He's hurting him," she blurted, pulling out her phone. She didn't hear the words. She didn't see the trembling cane on the ground. She just saw a younger man in a black jacket gripping the arm of an old veteran in distress. Within seconds, someone was on the phone with 911. The word assault slipped out like a match to dry leaves. Down below, the low rumble of an approaching SWAT vehicle joined the usual hum of traffic. Elijah didn't notice. He was too focused on Ray's eyes. Wild, unfocused, stuck somewhere in the jungle. "You're safe," Elijah whispered again. "I've got you." Ray's shouts echoed across the bridge, thin but sharp. "Get down, they're coming!" Elijah held his wrist carefully, lowering his hands, guiding his breathing. Anyone who'd ever walked the line at Arlington would have recognized it instantly. Control through calm. But not everyone on that bridge had walked that line. The first cruiser screeched to the curb. Officers spilled out fast. This wasn't a routine patrol. It was a tactical response. Someone on the phone must have said the magic words, "armed" or "dangerous." The SWAT van wasn't far behind. One of the officers raised a hand. "Step away from him." Elijah straightened slightly, still kneeling beside Ray, hands visible. "He's a veteran. I'm helping him." Another officer flanked left. "On your feet, now." "I can't leave him," Elijah replied. The old man grabbed at Elijah's sleeve again. The movement was desperate, not violent, but to adrenaline-jacked officers on a vague call, everything looks like a threat. The SWAT sergeant raised his taser. "Last warning." Elijah knew the protocol. He'd trained soldiers. He'd kept vigil for the fallen. But this was different. He kept his hands open, steady, unwavering. "Officer," he said calmly, "you're making a missed..." Pfft. The taser fired. The sound was small, but it cracked through the bridge like a gunshot. Electricity bit into Elijah's chest. His body arched against the railing, breath punched out of him in a single, guttural sound. He didn't fight it. He didn't scream. He just hit the ground hard, jaw clenched, eyes fixed on the sky that was already sliding into night. Ray's cane rolled into the street. The crowd gasped. Phones stayed up. No one understood what they just watched, but the internet didn't need understanding. It only needed a clip. "Get his hands," and someone shouted. Two officers moved in, pinning Elijah's arms as if they hadn't just dropped a soldier to the concrete for helping another one. Somewhere less than a minute away, a black sedan was already weaving through traffic. In the back seat sat a man with 4 silver stars on his collar and a face carved from years of command. General Nathan Cole had received the footage before it ever hit the news, and he was already on his way. The bridge's echo carried everything: the wind, the sirens, the ripple of footsteps. But the sound that lived in Elijah Brooks's ears was the faint crack of the taser, still buzzing against his chest like a ghost. The electric jolt had dropped him hard, spine smacking the concrete, his breath torn out in a single ragged sound. Training told him to stay still, ride it out. But instinct, the kind carved into him over years at Arlington, kept his eyes open, tracking, always tracking. Above him, the SWAT sergeant's voice barked orders into the night. "Hands out! Do not move!" Elijah didn't resist. His hands were already flat against the pavement, palms open, body curled slightly from the aftershock. Two officers rushed in, their knee pressure heavier than needed. Plastic cuffs cinched around his wrist with mechanical indifference. The old veteran's voice, Ray Turner's, cut through the chaos like a weak flare in the dark. "Don't hurt him," he cried. "He's one of us." No one listened. The crowd was bigger now. Phones glowed like fireflies around the perimeter. Dozens of lenses framed the scene from the worst possible angle. A young man on the ground, an old veteran shouting, armed officers standing over them. "Get him up!" the sergeant snapped. Two officers hauled Elijah to his knees. His jacket was half torn, badge still clipped to his inner pocket, visible only to anyone who bothered to look. No one did. "He's active duty," someone yelled from the back, but the words drowned beneath the sound of boots shifting, radios hissing, sirens bleeding into each other. Ray tried to push up from the bench. His hands trembled. His knees gave out. "Leave him alone," he gasped. He's a guard." One of the SWAT officers caught Ray before he hit the concrete, but the damage was already done. That moment, the faltering old man, the cuffs, the buzzing tasers, would live on in dozens of shaky videos before the night was over. "Sergeant," Elijah barked through clenched teeth, not defiant, controlled, trained. The SWAT sergeant turned. His jaw was square, face tense from the kind of shift where adrenaline outruns clarity. "You keep your mouth shut, son. I'm Staff Sergeant Elijah Brooks, 3rd U.S. Infantry, Tomb Guard at Arlington. That man is a combat veteran. He needs medical attention, not this circus." The sergeant snorted. "Yeah? And I'm Santa Claus. You're impersonating military personnel. We've had scams all month." Elijah stared straight into his eyes, even from the ground. "You just tasered a tomb guard." The officer hesitated, just for a second, but momentum was a beast with no brakes. "Put him in the back." They dragged Elijah toward the waiting SWAT van. Ray Turner's hand reached out, shaking. Don't let them." Elijah turned his head enough to lock eyes with him. His breathing had steadied now, posture straightening even with his wrists pinned behind his back. "It's okay, soldier," he said softly. "I'll be fine." They shoved him into the van. The doors slammed shut with a sound that didn't belong on a bridge, but in a cell block. The city's lights blurred past the reinforced glass as the van pulled away, sirens still wailing. The driver didn't speak. The sergeant rode in silence, jaw tight, knuckles white on his knee. Elijah sat rigid, not out of fear but discipline. His heart rate had already settled. He was trained to keep his breath calm in Arlington silence. He could do the same here. The booking station was a plain, tired building that smelled of bleach and static. An intake deputy leaned on the counter, surprised at what they were dragging in. "Impersonation," the sergeant barked. "Possible assault on an elderly male." The deputy looked at Elijah's face, then at the badge still half visible through the torn jacket. His brow furrowed. "You sure about that?" "Just process him," the sergeant snapped. They pulled the badge out during the search. The deputy froze when he read the inscription. Identification badge number 337. Tomb Guard, 3rd U.S. Infantry Regiment. There are fewer than 500 living tomb guards. The badge was more than rare. It was sacred. And anyone who knew the military even a little would know what that meant. But the machine had already started. They took fingerprints, mugshots, inventory of personal items. The cuffs left faint bruises on his wrists. The holding cell was quiet except for the fluorescent buzz overhead. Elijah sat on the metal bench, straight-backed, boots flat on the floor. The steel door clanged shut behind him. "Rough night?" a voice asked from the next cell. It was a broad-shouldered man in a county jumpsuit with a fading ranger patch tattoo on his bicep. "Heard you're military." Elijah didn't turn his head. "Tomb Guard." The man whistled low. "They really picked the wrong guy." Elijah's lips barely moved. They picked the wrong night. The two men sat in silence after that, not hostile, not friendly, just the kind of quiet men share when they both know the weight of a uniform. Outside the cell, the video was already online. SWAT officer tasers man on bridge. No context, just the moment of impact. The old man's shout, the sound of the taser, but someone else had seen it too. General Nathan Cole's sedan turned onto the street outside the precinct. He hadn't waited for a press briefing or a legal statement. He'd watched the shaky clip 10 times, long enough to see what no civilian had noticed, the badge glinting on Elijah's chest before the prongs hit. He closed the car door behind him without waiting for his escort. Inside, a rookie deputy nearly tripped over himself at the sight of the 4 stars. Cole didn't look at him. He just said, "Take me to him." Back in the holding cell, Elijah heard footsteps echoing down the hallway. Not hurried, not panicked, commanding. The kind of footsteps every soldier recognizes. The footsteps were different from the others. Not rushed like a rookie, not heavy like a beat cop. These were measured, controlled, the kind of steps that made a hallway seem narrower just by existing inside it. Elijah Brooks sat on the cold metal bench, hands folded loosely in front of him, posture as if he were still on the mat at Arlington. The light above flickered, humming like an insect trapped in glass. He didn't move. He didn't slouch. Tomb guards don't slouch. 2 deputies appeared first, nervous in the way people get when they know something far above their pay grade has just entered the building. Behind them walked General Nathan Cole, 4 stars pinned on his collar, his dark coat still wet from the night air. He didn't speak. He didn't have to. The hallway fell silent the way parade grounds do when command steps in. The deputy fumbled with the key, nearly dropping it. The cell door slid open with a metallic groan. "Sergeant Brooks," Cole said, voice low but caring. Elijah stood up slowly, precisely, shoulders squared, feet together, chin level. It wasn't a performance. It was instinct. He met the general's eyes without flinching. "Sir." For a moment, neither man spoke. There was too much in the air between them. Duty, reputation, and the ugly reality of what happens when the world mistakes a protector for a threat. Cole took 1 step inside the cell, closing the distance not like a superior officer, but like a commander walking toward one of his own. "Son," he said, "I saw the footage." Elijah inhaled slowly through his nose. "Yes, sir." "They tased a tomb guard." "Yes, sir." Cole's jaw clenched, not out of theatrical outrage, out of the kind of anger that lives deep, under layers of decades in uniform. He had commanded men through combat, held funerals at Arlington, delivered folded flags with hands that never shook. And now one of his own, someone wearing a badge more sacred than rank, had been slammed into the pavement on live video. "You didn't resist," Cole said flatly. "No, sir." "You helped a veteran." "Yes, sir." The general let out a slow breath through his teeth. "Then this just became my problem." Outside the cell, the precinct had changed temperature. Word had spread. 4 stars inside their holding block. Patrol officers suddenly stood straighter. Supervisors whispered into phones. The SWAT sergeant who'd fired the taser stood in the corner of the lobby, helmet off, face pale under the hard fluorescent lights. Cole walked out of the cell with Elijah at his side. Not behind him, with him. The way soldiers walk when they belong to the same family, no matter the stripes between them. The desk sergeant started to speak, voice shaky. "General, sir, we—" "Save it," Cole cut in quietly. Not loud, but sharp enough to slice through every excuse forming in the room. He turned to the SWAT sergeant. The man's mouth opened, but no sound came. "You fired a taser at an active duty tomb guard," Cole said. "You know what that badge is?" The sergeant swallowed. "Sir, the call said—" "I don't care what the call said." Cole's voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. The silence around him did all the work. "The man you dropped has spent years honoring soldiers this country forgot the second the ceremony ended." The sergeant's eyes flickered toward Elijah, then back. Shame crawled up his throat. Cole shifted his attention to the watch commander. "I want this undone, right now." "Sir, the paperwork's still processing." "Then unprocess it." The room froze. The watch commander moved faster than he ever had in his career. In minutes, the cuffs were gone. Elijah's personal items were returned. Badge, wallet, folded gloves. His knuckles brushed the worn leather of the gloves as if grounding himself. He slipped them on with the kind of precision no arrest could strip away. A medic arrived to check him. Elijah waved him off. "I'm fine." Cole raised an eyebrow. "You took a full taser discharge." Elijah straightened. "I've had worse standing in freezing rain for 6 hours, sir." Cole huffed. Not quite a laugh, but something that almost resembled it. "Figures." The two of them walked out together. Outside the station, the night was colder. Wind carried the distant noise of traffic and the rustle of flags that lined the boulevard. Across the street, cameras glinted. Press vans were already parked at the curb. The story had gotten out, faster than anyone could contain it. Cole turned to Elijah. "This isn't just about you anymore." "Yes, sir," Elijah said simply. Cole's gaze hardened, not at him, but at the world that required this conversation in the first place. A man stands guard for the unknowns, then gets tased for helping one of the living. That's not a headline I'm willing to let live. He gestured toward the waiting car. "We're going to the courthouse." Elijah frowned slightly. Now. You're not going to walk out of this like some suspect who got lucky. You're going to walk out as what you are, a soldier who held the line. Inside the sedan, the city blurred past in streaks of yellow and blue. Traffic lights flickered overhead like quiet witnesses. Elijah sat with his hands folded in his lap, posture steady, face calm. Cole glanced at him sideways. "You know," the general said, "I've been in this job long enough to see a lot of disgrace. But this," he shook his head, "this is different. The country watches tomb guards in silence. You men represent every name carved into those stones. And they put a taser in your chest for doing what that badge means?" Elijah didn't answer. He didn't need to. Cole turned forward. "I buried my brother at Arlington. You walked the mat that day." Elijah's eyes flicked toward him. "I remember. You didn't flinch at the rifle volley. My sister said you looked like stone. She said it made her feel like somebody cared enough to keep watch." Elijah's voice was quiet. "That's what we're for, sir." Cole nodded slowly. "Yeah, that's exactly why this ends with more than an apology." As they neared the courthouse, more people gathered outside. Media, vets, bystanders. The clip had spread like a spark on dry brush. "Tomb guard tased" was already trending. Cole's driver slowed near the steps. The general's door opened first. Elijah followed him out. Wind caught his windbreaker, tugging at the edges. He didn't slouch. He didn't hide. He walked like the sentinel he was trained to be. Somewhere in the crowd, someone whispered, "That's him." The general stopped at the base of the courthouse steps and turned to Elijah. His voice dropped low. "You keep your bearing, not for them, for the man on that bridge." Elijah nodded once. "Yes, sir." Cole gave a hard, approving glance. "Good. Then let's remind them who you are." They started up the steps together. General Nathan Cole, 4 stars gleaming, and Staff Sergeant Elijah Brooks, a tomb guard who'd just become the face of something much bigger than a misunderstanding. Morning light stretched across the Rutherford County Courthouse like someone had dragged gold through gray. The flag at the front entrance snapped in the wind. It wasn't a day for ceremony, but the air had the weight of one. A tomb guard had been tased. A general had shown up. And now the country was watching. Inside, the wooden benches were already filling with press, veterans, curious locals, and a few stone-faced officers who wished this day would disappear into a paperwork drawer. The young SWAT sergeant who'd pulled the trigger sat near the back, shifting in his seat. His hands wouldn't stop moving. At the defense table, Staff Sergeant Elijah Brooks sat straight-backed, hands folded on the table, uniform jacket repaired and pressed from the night before. He wore no expression, not stoic, not angry, not afraid, just still. The kind of still that comes from walking 21 steps back and forth in freezing rain at 3 a.m. Behind him, the courtroom door opened. Every head turned. General Nathan Cole entered. No announcement, no security escort, just 4 stars glinting faintly on his collar. Conversations died like someone had cut the air itself. The bailiff stiffened. "Attention in the court!" The general walked down the aisle without hurrying. When men like him move, the room rearranges around them. He took the front row seat, folded his hat under one arm, and waited. The judge entered moments later, a woman in her 60s with steel gray hair and eyes that had seen 1,000 excuses. She rapped the gavel once. "This court will come to order. State of Tennessee versus Staff Sergeant Elijah Brooks," the clerk read, "on charges of resisting arrest, disorderly conduct, and impersonation of a military officer." The judge's gaze slid to Elijah. "Sergeant Brooks, do you have counsel?" Elijah shook his head once. "No, Your Honor. The truth will do." That quiet answer hung in the room. The prosecutor stood, papers trembling just enough to betray the nerves. Beneath the suit, "Your Honor, the state has permission to speak, Your Honor?" A calm, iron voice interrupted. It wasn't Elijah. It was the general. The prosecutor froze mid-sentence. The judge looked up over her glasses. "And you are?" "General Nathan Cole," he said, stepping forward. "Chief of Staff, United States Army." The silence in that courtroom wasn't respectful. It was reverent. "Proceed," the judge said softly. Cole faced the bench, but his voice was aimed at everyone. "The man you're charging is not a pretender," he began. "He is one of fewer than 500 living tomb guards in the history of this nation. He stands watch at Arlington National Cemetery, guarding the unknown soldier. 21 steps, 21 seconds, every day, every night, for all of us." His words didn't rise, but they filled every inch of air. Last night, on a bridge, this soldier saw a combat veteran collapsing. He did what every decent American should do. He went to help. And because the world is quick to film and slow to understand, he got tased. Cole turned slowly, letting his eyes sweep the courtroom like a quiet storm. They landed on the SWAT sergeant in the back. The man's eyes dropped to the floor. "I've buried men who wore that badge," Cole continued. "I've watched families crumble into the marble at Arlington. This man," he gestured to Elijah, "stands for every one of them." The judge's pen had stopped moving. The prosecutor cleared his throat. "General, with respect, there were multiple 911 calls reporting." Cole cut him off without looking at him. "And how many of those calls understood what they were seeing?" No one answered. Cole turned back to the judge. "I've been in uniform longer than most of the people in this room have been alive. And I can tell you something plainly. A tomb guard doesn't impersonate anything. He embodies it." A murmur rippled through the gallery. Veterans, old and young, shifting forward as if they'd been waiting for someone to say those words out loud. The judge leaned back, adjusting her glasses. "Prosecution?" The state's attorney lowered his notes. "Your Honor, the state withdraws all charges." She nodded slowly. "So ordered." The gavel struck once. It wasn't loud. It didn't have to be. Case dismissed. Reporters in the gallery didn't clap. They didn't need to. This was one of those rare stories that didn't require fireworks to be remembered. It would travel quietly, through veteran halls, military families, quiet corners of the internet, where honor isn't something debated but lived. Elijah stood. His uniform didn't need words. He turned to the general, and together they exchanged a salute. Clean, crisp, as if the chaos of the night before had never touched the watch he kept. "Sergeant," Cole said quietly, close enough for Elijah alone to hear, "you didn't just stand for one man. Last night, you reminded them who we are." "Yes, sir," Elijah replied. His voice didn't waver. Outside the courthouse, the crowd had grown larger. Veterans with service caps, civilians holding flags, a few holding signs that simply said, "Respect the badge." Cameras flashed, but they didn't feel invasive. They felt quiet, like they'd stumbled into something solemn. The general turned to Elijah as they stood on the steps. "I've already spoken to the governor. The department will issue an apology. But you and I both know." He paused, his eyes hardening slightly. "Some apologies aren't enough." Elijah nodded. "That's not why I wear it, sir." "I know," Cole said. "That's why it matters." They descended the courthouse steps side by side, not as rank and file, but as soldier and commander. The world outside had finally caught up to what happened on that bridge. By the afternoon, the courthouse steps had emptied out, leaving only the echo of footsteps and a single flag swaying in the wind. The headlines were already moving faster than the people who wrote them. "Tomb guard tased on Nashville Bridge. General Cole intervenes in viral arrest. Misunderstanding becomes national symbol of honor." But Elijah Brooks wasn't reading any of it. He was walking back to where it all began. The bridge was quiet now, only the wind and the sound of water moving below. The sun hung low, the same hour as the night before. He paused at the point where the taser prongs had dropped him, where the crowd had gathered, where misunderstanding had exploded into a moment that couldn't be undone. Someone had swept the walkway clean. Ray Turner's cane was propped neatly against the bench railing, and sitting there under the slanting sunlight was Ray himself. The old veteran looked better now, cleaner jacket, fresh bandage on his temple. His hat still read Quezon 1968, but his eyes were clearer than they'd been in years. He saw Elijah approach and let out a raspy laugh. "Well, if it ain't the guy who got famous for sitting on his ass in handcuffs." Elijah cracked the smallest of smiles. "I prefer unjustly detained national symbol." Ray coughed a laugh that turned into a half-wheeze. "Yeah, that's better." Elijah sat down next to him on the same bench where he'd first knelt. The river kept moving beneath them, like time itself had no interest in their headlines. For a while, neither man spoke. "You saved me," Ray finally said, voice quieter than the wind. "All that shouting last night, it wasn't about here. I was back in the jungle. I thought the mortars were coming again." Elijah didn't look at him. He stared out over the water, hands folded in his lap like he was at the rail in Arlington. "I know," he said softly. "I've seen it before." Ray nodded slowly. "They thought you were hurting me." "They saw what they were ready to see," Elijah answered. "Not what was real." Ray turned to face him fully, something steady in his gaze. "That general, he showed up for you." Elijah shook his head. "He showed up for what this uniform stands for." Ray swallowed, the weight of decades sitting on his shoulders. "You know, we came home from Nam and people spit at us. They didn't understand then either. Maybe they never will." Elijah finally met his eyes. "Maybe not, but they'll remember this." The old man's hands trembled as he reached into his jacket pocket. He pulled out a folded slip of paper and handed it over. It was a printout of the plaque that had been proposed that morning. The city council had already called the general. The decision had been made fast. At the base of the bridge railing, on a piece of granite being set in that very moment, would read, "For those who stand watch, even when the world misunderstands." Elijah traced the edge of the paper with his thumb, then folded it back carefully. "You don't need a monument for this." Ray chuckled softly. "It ain't for you, son. It's for the next guy who stands where you stood and gets it wrong, or gets it right and nobody notices." The sky above the river shifted colors, trading blue for burnt orange. The light hit Elijah's face like the kind of salute the world doesn't know how to give. He adjusted his windbreaker, then straightened his spine. Even out of ceremonial uniform, that tomb guard posture lived in his bones. Ray looked over at him and gave a sharp, if shaky, salute. This time Elijah returned it. No crowd, no cuffs, no misunderstanding. Just two soldiers, one old, one still walking the watch, acknowledging something larger than themselves. That night in Arlington National Cemetery, the silence was the kind only sacred places know. Tourists were gone. Floodlights glowed softly on the marble. The tomb of the unknown soldier gleamed beneath a thin veil of mist. Elijah's boots hit the mat in perfect cadence. 21 forward, pause, 21 back, pause. The rhythm never changed. It never bowed to headlines or the noise of the world outside. Somewhere on a bridge in Tennessee, a plaque was being set in stone. Somewhere an old veteran was sleeping a little easier. And somewhere online, thousands of strangers were watching a clip. But now they knew the story behind it. Elijah didn't need them to understand. He just needed to stand. My standard will remain perfection. Through the years of diligence and praise and the discomfort of the elements, I will walk my tour in humble reverence. His rifle angled perfectly against his shoulder. The click of his heels echoed against the marble archways, like a heartbeat that belonged not to one man, but to every name carved in stone. Honor isn't loud. It doesn't demand attention. It endures. If this story moved you, if it reminded you that honor still exists in quiet places, then don't just scroll past. Hit subscribe and turn on the bell so you never miss another powerful story like this. One click helps keep these real stories of courage, sacrifice, and duty alive.